The Winchester repeater felt cold in Rose's hand as she stood outside the saloon on that scorching afternoon in Malad City, Idaho, knowing that stepping through those swinging doors would brand her forever in the eyes of every soul in town. August 1876 had brought relentless heat to the small frontier settlement, and now it brought her to a crossroads she had never imagined facing when she left Boston 6 months ago as a mail-order bride to a man who turned out to be nothing but lies wrapped in expensive letters. The women on the boardwalk turned their backs when she passed, their skirts rustling with indignation. Rose Thompson had arrived in Malad City wearing a modest traveling dress and carrying a letter promising marriage to a prosperous merchant named Harold Gaines. What she found instead was a 2-room shack, and a man who ran an illegal gambling operation from the back room of the general store. When she refused to help him cheat prospectors out of their hard-earned gold, Harold spread vicious rumors that she had been working in a brothel back east, that she had come west not for marriage but to ply an immoral trade. Within 2 weeks of her arrival, Harold was found shot dead behind the livery stable, killed over gambling debts he owed to men far more dangerous than himself. But the damage to Rose's reputation had already been done. No respectable establishment would hire her. The boarding house where she had been staying refused to let her room there any longer. The pastor's wife physically blocked the church door when Rose tried to attend Sunday services. Even the laundress refused her business. Rose had exactly $3.20 to her name, a trunk full of carefully sewn dresses that seemed to mock her circumstances, and a pride that burned hotter than the Idaho sun beating down on the dusty street. She pushed through the saloon doors with her head held high. The piano player missed a note. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the establishment turned toward her, and she could feel the weight of their judgment like a physical thing pressing against her chest. "I need work," she said clearly, addressing the man behind the bar, a thick-necked former boxer named Pete who ran the Lucky Dollar Saloon. "I can keep books, serve drinks, or deal cards. I am educated, reliable, and willing to work hard for fair wages." Pete wiped down the bar with a rag that had seen better days, his expression carefully neutral. "You know what folks will say, Miss Thompson. You know what they already say." "They say it whether I work or starve," Rose replied, setting her shoulders back. "I would prefer to eat." A low chuckle came from the corner table, and Rose turned to see a man she had not noticed before. He sat with his chair tilted back against the wall, his boots propped on an empty chair, a black Stetson tipped low over his eyes. But she could see his face clearly enough now as he pushed the hat back, revealing sharp features tanned dark by years under the sun, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to take her measure in a single glance. "Give the lady a job, Pete," the man said, his voice carrying an authority that made the saloon keeper straighten instinctively. "Seems to me this establishment could use someone who can actually count past 20 without taking off their boots." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. Pete shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. "Now, Silas, you know how people talk. Having her work here, it would just confirm what they already think." "What they think," the man called Silas said, standing with a fluid grace that spoke of confidence and perhaps danger, "does not put food on Miss Thompson's table or a roof over her head. What they think is cheap and easy, costs them nothing to spread around like manure. Doing right takes actual backbone." He walked toward the bar with a deliberate stride, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Rose noticed that everyone in the saloon seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Silas Reeves was not a large man, but he carried himself with the kind of presence that made size irrelevant. He wore dusty trail clothes, a gun belt that sat low on his hips, and an expression that suggested he had seen enough of the world to know exactly what he thought of it. "Pete here is going to give you a job keeping his books," Silas said, looking directly at Rose now. The previous system involved Pete trying to remember who paid what and when, which, as you might imagine, led to considerable confusion and several fistfights. "You will work decent hours, you will be paid fairly, and anyone who gives you trouble will answer to me personally." "Now hold on," Pete protested, but the look Silas gave him stopped the words in his throat. "I believe we have an understanding," Silas said quietly. "Miss Thompson needs honest work. You need someone who can read, write, and cipher. Seems like a natural arrangement to me." Rose found her voice, though her heart was hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Reeves, but I do not need charity. If I am to work here, it will be because I have earned the position through my own merit, not because someone intimidated the owner into hiring me." Silas turned to look at her fully, and a slow smile spread across his face. It changed his entire appearance, softening the hard edges and revealing something unexpectedly kind beneath the frontier toughness. "Fair enough. Pete, show Miss Thompson your books. Let her prove what she can do." Pete grumbled but produced a ledger that looked like it had been through a war. Pages were stained with whiskey, the handwriting was nearly illegible, and the math was questionable at best. Rose took the book, flipped through several pages, and felt her fingers itch to bring order to the chaos. "You are short approximately $40 based on what you show received versus what you show paid out," she said after a few minutes of examination. "But I suspect the actual number is higher because these entries here and here do not make logical sense. A barrel of whiskey does not cost $17 one week and $8 the next unless you have changed suppliers, which according to this you have not." Pete's face reddened. "Well, things get confused when it is busy. Things get stolen when the books are not properly kept," Rose corrected. "Someone has been helping themselves to your profits, and without accurate records, you have no way of knowing who or how much." She saw respect flicker in Pete's eyes, quickly followed by calculation. A woman who could catch theft in his books could save him real money. That mattered more than reputation in the end. Money always did. "You can start tomorrow," Pete said gruffly. 8 in the morning. I will pay you $30 a month plus one meal a day. You will keep the books, manage inventory, and help serve when we are short-handed. But you will not work upstairs, and I will make that clear to anyone who asks." It was not charity. It was not kindness. It was pure business sense, and Rose respected that more than she would have respected pity. She nodded once, crisp and professional. "I will be here at 8 sharp. Thank you, Mr. Pete." She turned to leave, conscious of every eye still watching her, but Silas stepped into her path. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the stubble that shadowed his jaw. He smelled like leather, horse, and the kind of clean sweat that came from honest work under the sun. "You will need a place to stay," he said, not quite a question. "I will manage," Rose replied, though she had no idea how. Every boarding house in town had made their position clear. "There is a small cabin on my property," Silas continued as if she had not spoken. "It belonged to the previous foreman before he moved on. It has a good roof, a working stove, and a door that locks. I will rent it to you for $10 a month, and before you get your pride all ruffled up, you should know that is exactly what I charged the last tenant." Rose wanted to refuse. She wanted to maintain her independence, to prove she needed nothing from anyone. But she was also practical enough to know that sleeping in the street was not a viable option, and her limited funds would not last long paying hotel rates. I will inspect the property before agreeing, she said carefully, and I will expect a written lease with clear terms. That smile appeared again, slow and genuine. I would expect nothing less. Come on, then. We are losing daylight. Silas had a horse tied outside, a patient bay gelding that nuzzled his shoulder when he approached. Rose had not ridden in months, not since leaving Boston, but she gathered her skirts and accepted Silas's hand to mount behind him when he offered. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, his hand warm and calloused against hers, strong enough to support her weight easily as she settled onto the horse's back. "Hold on," he said, and she had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist as he urged the horse forward. They rode through town, and Rose felt every stare like brands against her skin. Mrs. Henderson clutched her daughter close as they passed, as if moral corruption could spread through the air like influenza. Mr. Patterson, who owned the general store, actually spat in the dirt. The banker, Mr. Wilkins, turned his entire body away, presenting his back to them with deliberate insult. "They will talk themselves hoarse," Silas said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear over the horse's hoofbeats. "Let them. Talk is just noise, and noise fades." "Easy to say when you are not the subject of it," Rose replied, hating the bitterness in her voice but unable to suppress it entirely. "I have been the subject of plenty of talk in my time," Silas said. "Most of it true, some of it exaggerated, all of it tiresome. You learn to live beyond what other people think. Their opinions do not pay your bills or keep you warm at night." They left the main street behind, following a well-worn trail that led west toward the mountains. The landscape here was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all sage brush and rocky outcroppings with the occasional stand of cottonwood marking where water ran. The air smelled clean, sharp with juniper and pine from the higher elevations. After about 20 minutes of riding, they crested a low rise and Rose saw the property spread before them. A sturdy ranch house sat in a small valley with good grass and a creek running through it. There were several outbuildings, a barn that looked well maintained, and corrals containing perhaps 20 horses. And there, set back from the main house by a respectful distance, was a small cabin with whitewashed walls and a covered porch. Silas dismounted and helped her down. His hand spanned her waist easily, and he lowered her to the ground with the same careful strength he seemed to bring to everything he did. Rose stepped back quickly, trying to ignore the warmth that lingered where he had touched her. "This is the cabin," Silas said, producing a key from his pocket. "Like I said, good roof, working stove, door that locks. Previous tenant left some furniture behind, nothing fancy but serviceable." He unlocked the door and pushed it open, stepping back to let her enter first. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the afternoon heat. As her eyes adjusted, Rose took in the single room with a careful eye. There was a narrow bed against one wall, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest of drawers, and indeed a cast iron stove that appeared to be in good condition. The floor was wooden planks, swept clean. The walls were bare but solid. A small window looked out toward the mountains. It was simple, spare, and utterly honest. No pretense, no decoration, just solid shelter from the elements. Rose felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen slightly. "There is a well about 30 yards from the cabin," Silas continued, "and an outhouse behind that stand of cottonwoods. I run cattle and horses on this property, but I am gone for days at a time moving stock or buying new animals. My current hired hand, Tommy, lives in the bunkhouse attached to the barn. He is young but reliable. You would have privacy here." Rose walked slowly around the space, running her hand along the table, testing the bed, checking the stove flue. Everything was exactly as Silas had represented it, honest and fair. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, turning to face him where he stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. "You do not know me. For all you know, everything they say about me could be true." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his words were measured and careful. "I do not give a damn what you might have done before you came to Malad City. What I know is what I saw today. A woman who held her head up when everyone else tried to push it down. A woman who asked for work, not handouts. A woman smart enough to spot theft in a mess of bad bookkeeping within minutes. That tells me more about your character than any gossip ever could." He stepped into the cabin, and suddenly the space felt smaller, more intimate. Rose was acutely aware that they were alone out here, that no one would see or know if anything happened. But she felt no fear, which was perhaps the most surprising thing of all. "I lost my mother when I was 12, Silas said, his voice taking on a quality she had not heard before, something raw and honest. "She was a good woman, a kind woman, but my father drank, and when he drank he got mean. She left him and brought me to Colorado, tried to start over. Folks in the town where we settled decided she was a fallen woman, that leaving her husband made her immoral. They made her life hell. Would not let me attend school, would not let her find work. She died 2 years later, and I have always believed it was because they broke her spirit long before her body gave out." Rose felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I am sorry. I am not telling you this for pity," Silas continued. "I am telling you so you understand that I know what it is like to watch good people get destroyed by the judgment of small minds. I swore when I buried my mother that if I ever had the means and the opportunity, I would not stand by and let it happen again." He met her eyes directly, and she saw old pain there, carefully controlled but never fully healed. It made him real in a way nothing else had, transformed him from a mysterious benefactor into a person with scars and history and reasons for the choices he made. $10 a month, Rose said softly, "and I want that lease in writing." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "You will have it by tomorrow evening." They rode back to town in the deepening twilight, the sky painted in shades of purple and gold that made the harsh landscape look almost gentle. Silas dropped her at the hotel where she had been staying, using the last of her limited funds. "I will come by in the morning with a wagon," he said. "Help you move your things out to the cabin." "I can manage," Rose started to protest, but he cut her off with a look. "I am sure you can. But there is no sense in struggling when help is offered freely and with no strings attached. Sometimes accepting help is not weakness, Miss Thompson. Sometimes it is just common sense." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and rode off into the gathering darkness, leaving her standing on the boardwalk with her thoughts in turmoil and her heart beating in a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. That night, Rose lay in her hotel bed and tried to make sense of the day. This morning she had been desperate and alone, watching her options narrow to nothing. Tonight she had employment, housing, and something she had not expected to find in this harsh frontier town: an ally. Silas Reeves was not what she had imagined when she thought of cowboys. He was not brash or crude or careless. He moved with purpose, spoke with deliberation, and seemed to possess a quiet strength that needed no posturing or display. And those eyes, those storm-gray eyes, saw things that other people missed. She forced herself to be practical. He was helping her because of his past, because of his mother. It was not about her specifically, not about any attraction or interest. It was about his own demons and his own need to right old wrongs. She would accept the help gratefully, work hard, pay her own way, and build a life here through her own efforts. Anything else was foolishness. True to his word, Silas appeared the next morning with a sturdy wagon just as Rose was settling her bill with the hotel clerk, who could barely contain his relief at seeing her leave. The man had been terrified that her continued presence would drive away respectable guests, never mind that the hotel was half empty anyway. "That everything?" Silas asked, eyeing her single trunk and two smaller bags. "I traveled light," Rose replied. "Or perhaps more accurately, I had little worth bringing." They loaded her belongings quickly and headed out of town. In daylight, Rose could appreciate the landscape more fully. The valley where Malad City sat was surrounded by mountains on three sides, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in late summer. The town itself had sprung up around natural hot springs that gave it its name, though most of the settlement had moved away from the springs themselves as development expanded. "How long have you been ranching here?" Rose asked as they rolled along the rutted road. "About 5 years," Silas replied, handling the reins with easy competence. "Came up from Texas originally, worked cattle drives for nearly a decade. Saved my money, learned the business, and when I had enough put together, I came north looking for property. Found this place and knew it was right. Good water, good grass, close enough to town for supply runs but far enough out for privacy. You run it yourself, mostly. Tommy helps, and I hire on a few extra hands during roundup or when I am moving cattle to market, but I keep operations small enough that I can manage without a full crew. Less overhead, less complication." They fell into a comfortable silence as the wagon rumbled along. Rose found herself studying Silas from the corner of her eye, taking in details she had missed yesterday. The way his hands held the reins, confident but never rough. The set of his shoulders, straight but not rigid. The small scar through his eyebrow that made her wonder what story lay behind it. "You can ask," Silas said without looking at her, amusement coloring his voice. "Ask what?" Rose replied, startled. "About the scar. Everyone does eventually." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at being caught staring. "I was not going to pry." "Bar fight in Abilene, 1871, he said anyway. Fellow took exception to me suggesting he was cheating at cards. He was cheating at cards, mind you, but pointing it out turned out to be unwise. He had a bottle. I was slow to duck, and the result is this permanent reminder that being right and being smart are not always the same thing." Despite herself, Rose laughed. It felt strange, foreign, like a language she had almost forgotten how to speak. When was the last time she had laughed? Before Harold died, certainly. Before she discovered his true nature, maybe not since leaving Boston and the life she had known there. "There it is," Silas said softly, and she realized he was looking at her now, his gray eyes warm. "Was starting to wonder if you remembered how." "It has been a difficult few months," Rose said, the laughter dying away as reality reasserted itself. "I imagine so, but difficult does not have to be permanent." They arrived at the cabin and Silas helped her unload her belongings, carrying the heavy trunk as if it weighed nothing. He set it down inside the cabin and stepped back, giving her space. "I will leave you to settle in," he said. "If you need anything, the main house is always open. Tommy is usually around if I am not, and I will have that lease drawn up for you by tonight." "Thank you," Rose said, the words feeling inadequate for everything he had done. "Truly, Mr. Reeves, I do not know how to properly express my gratitude." "Silas," he corrected, "and no gratitude necessary. You are paying for the cabin same as any tenant, and you earned that job at the Lucky Dollar with your own skills. I just helped point you in the right direction." After he left, Rose spent the afternoon transforming the cabin into a home. She unpacked her dresses and hung them carefully in the small wardrobe. She arranged her few books on the windowsill. She made up the bed with her own linens, soft cotton sheets she had embroidered herself back, when she still believed her life would follow a predictable path. As the sun began to set, she stood on the small porch and looked out at the mountains. The air was cooling rapidly, the way it did in high desert country, and she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She could hear the creek babbling over rocks, the distant lowing of cattle, the evening song of birds she could not name. It was beautiful and lonely and promising all at once. She started work at the Lucky Dollar the next morning, arriving precisely at 8 as agreed. Pete showed her to a small back office that was really just a closet with a desk and chair crammed into it. But it had a door she could close and a lamp that gave good light. "Inventory records are in that cabinet," Pete said, gesturing to a battered filing cabinet that looked like it had fallen off a stagecoach at some point. "Receipts are supposed to be in there too, but some might have gotten misplaced. Do the best you can." Rose rolled up her sleeves, both literally and figuratively, and dove into the chaos. It was worse than she had initially thought. Some receipts were missing entirely. Others were illegible. The inventory counts had clearly been guessed at rather than properly measured. And there were irregular payments noted in the ledger that made no sense until she realized they were probably bribes or protection money, though Pete would never admit to such things directly. She worked through the morning, pausing only when Pete brought her a plate of eggs and toast around 10. The food was simple but well prepared, and she ate while continuing to sort through papers, her mind already organizing the information into usable categories. By afternoon, she had a preliminary system sketched out and was beginning to enter corrected figures into a new ledger she had convinced Pete to purchase from the general store. She was so absorbed in the work that she did not notice the commotion in the main room until Pete stuck his head into her office. "Got a situation," he said tersely. "Might want to stay back here until it settles." But Rose could hear raised voices, the sound of furniture scraping, and she could not resist moving to the door to peer out into the saloon. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 men had surrounded Silas at a corner table. They were rough-looking characters, the kind who made their living through intimidation and violence. The largest one, a brute with a scarred face and hands like hams, was doing the talking. "We heard you are harboring that whore Thompson," the man was saying, his voice loud enough to carry through the entire saloon. "Running a respectable business, Reeves, cannot have that kind of filth on the property. Gives the wrong impression." Silas remained seated, his posture deceptively relaxed. But Rose could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested casually near his gun belt. "Miss Thompson is my tenant," Silas said, his voice calm and level. "She pays her rent, minds her own business, and causes no trouble." "Cannot see how that concerns you, Garrett." "It concerns all of us decent folk," Garrett replied. "Town does not need her kind here. Should have stayed wherever she came from." Rose felt shame and anger warring in her chest. She wanted to flee, to hide in her little office and pretend she had not heard. But something else rose up in her, something stubborn and fierce that refused to let these men define her without at least hearing her speak. Before she fully realized what she was doing, Rose stepped out into the main room. Every eye turned toward her, and she felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. But she kept walking until she stood a few feet from Silas's table. "I am Rose Thompson," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "And you are correct that I am not what anyone would call decent by this town's standards. I came here as a mail-order bride to a man who turned out to be a criminal and a liar. When I refused to participate in his illegal activities, he spread vicious rumors about my past. After he died, those rumors became accepted as truth, and I have been judged and condemned without trial or evidence. But I am not a whore, and I will not accept that label simply because it is convenient for small-minded people to apply it. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Even the piano player had stopped mid-tune. Garrett's face turned an ugly shade of red, and he took a step toward her. "You got some nerve," he began, but Silas was on his feet in an instant, placing himself between Rose and the larger man. "That is close enough," Silas said, and there was something in his voice now that had not been there before, something cold and dangerous. "The lady has said her piece. You have said yours. Time for everyone to move along." "This is not over," Garrett spat. "Town council is meeting next week. We are going to make sure decent people do not have to associate with trash like her." "Looking forward to it," Silas replied evenly. Always educational to watch the town council debate matters of morality, while half of them are cheating on their wives, and the other half are skimming from the municipal budget. Garrett looked like he wanted to swing at someone, but something in Silas's stance apparently convinced him that would be unwise. He turned and stormed out of the saloon, his companions following like faithful dogs. The moment they were gone, the saloon erupted in conversation. Rose stood frozen, her heart hammering as Silas turned to face her. "That was brave," he said quietly. "Probably not wise, but brave." "I am tired of hiding," Rose replied, and she realized it was true. "I am tired of being ashamed of things I did not do. If they are going to condemn me, they can at least condemn the real me, not some fiction they created." Something shifted in Silas's expression, a deepening of respect mixed with something else she could not quite name. "Fair enough, but that does not mean you have to face their poison alone. When that council meeting happens, I will be there, and I will make damn sure they hear exactly what I think of their moral crusade." Pete emerged from behind the bar, looking nervous. "Listen, Rose, maybe it would be better if you worked from the cabin for a while. I can send the books home with you. You can work there where it is quiet, safer." Rose understood what he was really saying. He was afraid that her presence in the saloon would drive away customers, would cause more trouble, and he was probably right. But accepting that felt like accepting defeat. "I was hired to work here," she said firmly. "Unless you are dismissing me, I will continue to work here. If customers choose not to patronize an establishment that employs me, that is their choice to make. But I will not slink away and hide as if I have done something wrong." Pete looked to Silas, clearly hoping for support, but Silas just shrugged. "The lady has a point. Besides, half the men who drink here have done things 10 times worse than anything she is accused of. Hypocrisy has always left a bad taste in my mouth." Rose returned to her office and tried to focus on the ledgers, but her hands were shaking too badly to write clearly. She set down her pen and pressed her palms flat against the desk, willing herself to calm. She had made an enemy today, that much was clear. Garrett was the type to hold grudges and act on them, and he apparently had the support of at least some of the town council. A soft knock on her door made her look up. Silas stood in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. "Thought you could use this," he said, offering her one of the glasses. Rose took it gratefully and sipped. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied her nerves. Silas leaned against the door frame, watching her with those perceptive gray eyes. "Garrett is all bluster," he said. "Mean but not particularly smart. He works as muscle for some of the larger ranchers, collecting debts and intimidating squatters. Thinks it makes him important." "He could still cause trouble," Rose pointed out. "He could, but he would be taking on more than just you. I have some pull in this town, and I am not shy about using it when necessary." Rose met his eyes over the rim of her glass. "Why do you care so much? I know you said it was because of your mother, but this goes beyond that, does it not? You are putting yourself at odds with the community for someone you barely know." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. "Maybe because I know what it is like to be judged for things beyond your control. My father's reputation followed me for years. People assumed I would turn out just like him, mean drunk with a quick temper. I had to work twice as hard to prove I was my own man. And maybe because when I look at you, I do not see a fallen woman. I see someone with courage and integrity who got dealt a bad hand and is doing her damnedest to play it anyway." The intensity in his gaze made Rose's breath catch. There was something happening here, something growing between them that went beyond simple kindness or shared circumstances. It frightened her as much as it intrigued her. "I should get back to work," she said softly, breaking eye contact. Silas nodded and straightened. "I will be around if you need anything." After he left, Rose sat for a long time staring at the ledger without seeing it. Her life had become complicated in ways she had not anticipated. She had come to Idaho expecting marriage and stability. Instead, she had found scandal and judgment. But she had also found unexpected kindness in a place she had not thought to look for it. Silas Reeves was a puzzle she was not sure she knew how to solve. The next week passed in a strange rhythm. Rose worked at the Lucky Dollar during the day, slowly bringing order to Pete's chaotic bookkeeping. She ate her meals either at the saloon or at the cabin, simple food she cooked herself on the small stove. And in the evenings, she sat on her porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains while trying not to think too hard about the man who lived in the ranch house 100 yards away. Silas was often gone, tending to his cattle or horses or whatever ranching business required his attention. But when he was around, he always seemed to find a reason to stop by the cabin. He brought her firewood, even though she had not asked for it. He fixed a loose board on her porch steps without being prompted. He invited her to dinner at the main house, meals prepared by Tommy, who turned out to be surprisingly skilled in the kitchen for a young ranch hand barely 20 years old. These dinners were the highlight of Rose's week, though she tried not to examine too closely why that was. Silas was easy to talk to, his conversation ranging from cattle prices to books to observations about human nature that showed a keen intelligence beneath the cowboy exterior. Tommy was cheerful and friendly, treating Rose with uncomplicated kindness that made her realize how starved she had been for simple human decency. On Friday evening, 1 week after the confrontation in the saloon, Silas rode into town with Rose on the back of his horse to attend the town council meeting. The meeting hall was packed, standing room only, and Rose felt the hostility in the air like a living thing. Garrett was there, along with several other men Rose recognized as his associates. The town council sat at a raised table at the front of the room, 5 men who represented what passed for authority in Malad City. Rose recognized the banker, Mr. Wilkins, the owner of the largest ranch in the area, Thomas Carver, the general store owner, Mr. Patterson, the doctor, Henry Mills, and the mayor, a retired cavalry officer named James Porter. Mayor Porter called the meeting to order and worked through several mundane items of business before finally addressing the matter everyone had really come to hear. There has been some concern raised about certain individuals in our community whose presence may be detrimental to the town's moral character, Porter said, his voice carefully neutral. Mr. Garrett has petitioned the council to take action. Garrett stood, looking smug. It is simple, gentlemen. We got a woman living here who is a known prostitute. She is living on respectable property, working in a saloon, presenting herself as decent folk when everyone knows what she really is. It is an insult to every God-fearing family in this town." Rose felt Silas tense beside her, but before he could speak, she stood. "May I address the council?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. Mayor Porter looked surprised but nodded. "You may speak, Miss Thompson." Rose walked to the front of the room, feeling every eye on her, every whisper cutting like knives. But she held her head high and looked directly at the 5 men who would decide her fate. "Gentlemen, I understand that my reputation in this town is badly damaged. I understand that Harold Gaines, before his death, told people I was a prostitute from Boston. But I would like to present some facts for your consideration. First, I have letters of recommendation from my previous employer in Boston, a law firm where I worked as a clerk for 3 years. I have the original correspondence from Harold Gaines that brought me to Idaho as his intended bride. I have my baptismal records from my church in Boston. All of these documents establish my identity and my history, none of which include prostitution." She pulled the papers from her bag and handed them to Mayor Porter, who examined them with furrowed brow. "Second, I have been in Malad City for 6 months. In that time, I have not engaged in any immoral conduct. I have not solicited anyone. I have not worked in any brothel. I have simply tried to find honest work and a place to live. The only crime I have committed is existing while being the subject of rumors." "Rumors do not come from nowhere," Garrett interrupted. "Why would Gaines say those things if they were not true?" Rose turned to face him directly. "Because I refused to help him cheat minors at cards. Because I discovered he was running illegal gambling and threatened to report him to the authorities. He destroyed my reputation as revenge, and apparently he succeeded so well that even his death has not stopped the poison from spreading." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people looked uncomfortable. Even Garrett seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Silas stood then, his presence commanding attention. "I have known Miss Thompson for 2 weeks now. In that time, I have seen her work harder and conduct herself with more dignity than most people in this room. She has done nothing to warrant being driven out of town, except fail to bow down before gossip and lies. If this council decides to condemn her without evidence, based solely on the word of a dead criminal, then you are not upholding morality. You are upholding cowardice." Thomas Carver, the rancher, leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, you have a reputation as a fair man. But you are also known to have a soft spot for strays and lost causes. How do we know you are not being taken in by a clever woman who knows how to manipulate male sympathy?" "Because I am not a fool," Silas replied evenly. "I have looked at the evidence. I have observed her character. And I have made my own judgment. If you choose to trust the lies of a dead cheat over the documented proof of an honest woman, that says more about this council than it does about Miss Thompson." Dr. Mills spoke for the first time, his voice thoughtful. "I examined these documents. They appear genuine, and I must note that in 6 months not a single person has come forward with direct evidence of immoral conduct, only rumor and supposition." Mr. Wilkins, the banker, shook his head stubbornly. "Appearance matters in a frontier town. We are trying to attract families, respectable businesses. Having someone like her here sends the wrong message." "Someone like me," Rose repeated, her voice hardening. "You mean someone who has been falsely accused, someone who refuses to accept condemnation for crimes she did not commit?" "Yes. I suppose that would send a dangerous message. It might encourage other people to think for themselves instead of blindly accepting what they are told." The room erupted in arguments, some supporting Rose, others demanding she be expelled from town. Mayor Porter had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. "This council will deliberate and vote," he announced. "The meeting is adjourned for 15 minutes. Rose returned to where Silas stood, her legs suddenly shaky with delayed reaction. He placed a steadying hand on her elbow, his touch warm through the fabric of her sleeve. "You did well," he said quietly. "Better than well. You made them think, and that is more than most people manage." "Will it be enough?" Rose asked. "We will know soon." The 15 minutes stretched like hours. Rose could feel the weight of stares, hear the whispers. Some people looked at her with sympathy now, but others remained hostile, convinced that any woman accused of immorality must be guilty regardless of evidence. Finally, the council returned to their seats. Mayor Porter looked tired, his expression grave. "This council has voted on the matter of Miss Rose Thompson," he announced. "By a vote of 3-2, we find insufficient evidence to support expulsion or any official action against her. She is free to live and work in Malad City without restriction." Relief flooded through Rose so powerfully she thought her knees might give out. Silas's hand tightened on her elbow, supporting her. But Garrett was on his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is an outrage. You are letting a whore corrupt our town because she brought some papers that could be forged. This council is spineless. This meeting is adjourned," Mayor Porter said firmly, banging his gavel. "And Mr. Garrett, I would advise you to watch your language. Slander is a serious matter." Garrett stormed out, but not before shooting Rose a look of pure hatred. She knew instinctively that this was not over, that he would not accept defeat gracefully. But for now, she had won. She had stood up for herself and prevailed. Outside, under the stars, Silas walked her to where his horse was tied. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and dust. "Thank you," Rose said softly, "for standing with me, for speaking up. I could not have done this without you." Silas looked down at her, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by the light spilling from the meeting hall windows. "You could have. You are stronger than you know, Rose Thompson, but I am glad you did not have to do it alone." He helped her mount the horse, and they rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. But Rose's mind was racing. Something had shifted tonight, some fundamental change in how she saw herself and her place in this harsh frontier world. She had stood before the town council and defended herself with truth and courage. She had not begged or pleaded or accepted their judgment meekly. She had fought, and she had won. And Silas had been there, steady and supportive, believing in her when she had barely believed in herself. When they reached the cabin, Silas dismounted and helped her down. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Rose found herself acutely aware of how close they were standing, how the moonlight cast silver highlights in his dark hair. "Rose," he said, his voice low and rough, "I need you to understand something. What I feel for you, it is not pity. It is not some crusade to right old wrongs. When I look at you, I see a woman who takes my breath away. I see courage and intelligence and a kind of fierce pride that makes me want to know everything about you. I see someone I could easily fall in love with if you gave me half a chance." Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. She had suspected, had felt the growing connection between them, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "Silas, I am a scandal," she whispered. "The council ruled in my favor tonight, but that does not change what people think. If you associate with me, if you court me, it will damage your reputation." "Let it," Silas replied. "I have spent too much of my life worrying about what other people think. I would rather be known as the fool who fell for Rose Thompson than the coward who let concern for reputation keep him from pursuing what makes him happy." He cupped her face gently, his calloused thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "But I need to know if you feel anything like this too. If I am alone in this, tell me now and I will step back. I will still be your friend, still your landlord, but I will not push for more if you do not want it." Rose closed her eyes, letting herself feel the warmth of his hand, the solidity of his presence. She had been so focused on survival, on defending herself, that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge what was growing in her heart. But it was there, undeniable, a pull toward this man who had shown her kindness when no one else would, who had stood beside her when everyone else stood in judgment. "I feel it," she admitted, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I feel it, and it terrifies me. I came here expecting one kind of life and got something completely different. Everything I thought I knew about love and marriage was turned on its head. I am not sure I know how to trust these feelings." "Then we will figure it out together," Silas said. "No rush, no pressure. We will take it slow, let this grow naturally. But I wanted you to know where I stand. I wanted you to know that when I defend you, when I help you, it is not just about doing the right thing anymore. It is because you matter to me. You matter more than I expected, more than I knew was possible." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Rose did not pull away. She met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle and searching and full of promise. It was not her first kiss, but it felt like a beginning nonetheless, the start of something she had not dared to hope for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little harder, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I should let you get some rest," he said, though he made no move to step away. "You should," Rose agreed, but she was smiling. He kissed her once more, quick and sweet, then mounted his horse and rode toward the main ranch house. Rose stood on her porch until he disappeared into the darkness, then went inside feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. She had come to Idaho as a mail-order bride and found betrayal. But perhaps, just perhaps, she had also found something real. The weeks that followed were the happiest Rose could remember in a long time. She fell into a routine that felt sustainable, even pleasant. She worked at the Lucky Dollar during the day, bringing order to Pete's books, and slowly earning his grudging respect as she saved him money and increased efficiency. She returned to the cabin each evening and often found Silas waiting, sometimes with fresh meat from hunting, sometimes with wild flowers he had picked, once with a rocking chair he had built with his own hands. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Rose told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a school teacher who died when she was 16, leaving her to make her own way in the world. She told him about the law firm where she had worked, learning bookkeeping and business, dreaming of a future that seemed safe and predictable. Silas told her about Texas, about learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk. He told her about his mother's strength, his father's weakness. He told her about the years after his mother died, when he had wandered from job to job, ranch to ranch, slowly building the skills and the savings that eventually allowed him to claim his own piece of land. They rode together on Sundays, exploring the surrounding countryside. Silas showed her hidden valleys where wild horses ran, springs where the water ran so cold it made your teeth ache, ancient rock formations that looked like they belonged in a painting. Rose had never been comfortable on horseback, but under Silas's patient instruction, she gradually gained confidence, and they kissed, sweet stolen moments that left Rose feeling like she was discovering a language she had not known she could speak. Silas was careful, respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the attraction between them was undeniable, a current that ran beneath every conversation, every casual touch. Pete noticed, of course. Everyone in town noticed. The gossip shifted, taking on new dimensions. Now Rose was not just a fallen woman. She was a fallen woman who had somehow managed to ensnare one of the most eligible bachelors in the territory. The whispers followed her everywhere, speculation about her methods, her morality, her ultimate intentions. Rose tried to ignore it, but some days it wore on her more than others. 3 months after the town council meeting, she was working in her office at the Lucky Dollar when she heard familiar voices in the main room. Looking up, she saw Mrs. Henderson and 2 other respectable ladies from town, the kind who organized church socials and considered themselves the arbiters of proper behavior. "It is shameful," Mrs. Henderson was saying, her voice pitched to Carrie. "That poor man has no idea what kind of woman he is dealing with. Someone should warn him before he makes a terrible mistake." Rose's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to march out there and confront them, to defend herself once again. But she was so tired of defending, so tired of fighting the same battles over and over. Instead, she heard Silas's voice, calm and clear. "Ladies, I appreciate your concern, but it is entirely misplaced. I know exactly what kind of woman Rose Thompson is. She is intelligent, hardworking, honest, and kind. She has faced more adversity in 6 months than most people face in a lifetime, and she has done so with grace and dignity. If you want to warn me about something, warn me about the danger of letting prejudice blind me to quality when I find it." But I think I have already avoided that particular pitfall. The silence that followed was profound. Rose stood frozen in her office doorway, hardly daring to breathe. "Well," Mrs. Henderson huffed, "I can see you have made up your mind. But do not say we did not try to help when you discover the truth about her." "The truth about her," Silas replied, his voice taking on an edge Rose had rarely heard, "is that she stands taller than anyone in this town. You ladies have a good afternoon." Rose heard the rustle of skirts as the women left in a huff. A moment later, Silas appeared in her doorway, his expression rueful. "Sorry about that. Seems like no matter how many times we prove them wrong, some people are determined to think the worst." Rose found her voice, though it came out thick with emotion. "You said I stand taller than anyone in this town." Silas stepped into the small office, crowding the space in a way that made her heart race. "I meant every word. You have been knocked down repeatedly, and every time you get back up. You refuse to accept other people's definitions of who you are. That takes strength most people do not have." Rose felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She was not going to cry, not here, not now. But Silas saw anyway, because he seemed to see everything when it came to her. "Come here," he said softly, and she went into his arms without hesitation. He held her gently, one hand stroking her hair, letting her absorb comfort from his solid presence. "I am so tired of fighting," Rose whispered against his chest. "I know, but you do not have to fight alone, and maybe it is time we gave them something new to talk about." Rose pulled back to look at him. "What do you mean?" Silas smiled, that slow smile that transformed his face. "Marry me, Rose Thompson. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life standing beside you. Let me be the one who gets to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. Let me be your partner, your defender, your greatest admirer." Rose's breath caught. It was too soon. A practical voice in her head insisted. They had known each other only a few months. But another voice, louder and more insistent, said that she had known him in the ways that mattered almost from the moment they met. She knew his character, his values, his heart. "Yes," she said, and watched joy transform his features. "Yes, Silas Reeves, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Rose felt like she was finally home. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by Mayor Porter, who had become something of an ally since the town council meeting. Tommy served as witness, grinning so wide Rose thought his face might split. Pete closed the lucky dollar for the afternoon and stood in the back of the room, looking pleased with himself for reasons Rose could not quite determine. Not many people attended, but Rose did not care. The ones who mattered were there. And when Silas slipped the simple gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, she felt a completeness she had not known she was missing. The reception was held at the ranch, an informal affair with food and dancing and genuine celebration. Tommy had decorated the main house with wildflowers and bunting. Several of Silas's friends from neighboring ranches came, along with a handful of people from town who had stood by Rose through the worst of the gossip. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Silas took Rose's hand and led her away from the gathering, up to the house they would now share. "I know this has all happened fast," he said as they stood in the bedroom that was now theirs. "And I know you have had a hard time trusting what people say versus what they actually mean. So I want to make you a promise, Rose Reeves. I will never lie to you. I will never betray you. I will work every day to be worthy of the gift you have given me by agreeing to share your life with mine." Rose reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar through his eyebrow, the strong line of his jaw. "I never thought I could be this happy. After everything that happened with Harold, after the way this town treated me, I thought maybe I was not meant for this kind of joy. But you changed that. You saw me when everyone else was looking through me. You defended me when it would have been easier to walk away. You gave me a reason to believe in love again." They came together then, husband and wife in truth, discovering each other with tenderness and passion. Silas was gentle but thorough, attentive to her responses, making sure she felt cherished and desired. Rose had been terrified that her lack of experience would somehow disappoint him, but he seemed to take pleasure in her pleasure, in teaching her what her body was capable of feeling. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Silas's arm around her shoulders, Rose's head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," Silas said into the darkness. "I know I have shown it more than said it, but I want you to hear the words. I love you, Rose. I love your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to be diminished by small minds. I love the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating on ledgers. I love how you look at sunrise like it is a painting made just for you. I love every single thing about you." Rose felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, cleansing tears. "I love you too. I fought it at first because I was scared, but I love you, Silas. You are the best man I have ever known." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time since coming to Idaho, Rose felt completely safe. Life, as Silas's wife, brought changes Rose had not entirely anticipated. She continued working at the Lucky Dollar 3 days a week, unwilling to give up the independence and purpose the job provided. But she also took on responsibilities at the ranch, helping Tommy with the books, managing supplies, even learning to treat minor injuries in the livestock. The town's attitude toward her shifted in subtle ways. Being Silas Reeves's wife carried weight that being Rose Thompson alone had not. People were not exactly friendly, but the open hostility decreased. Mrs. Henderson still crossed the street to avoid her, but the shopkeepers served her without comment. The pastor's wife nodded coldly when they passed, but no longer blocked the church door. It was not acceptance exactly, but it was a kind of grudging acknowledgement that she was here to stay. Garrett, however, remained a problem. He could not forgive the fact that Rose had not been driven from town, that she had in fact married one of the most respected men in the territory. He made snide comments when he was drunk, spread new rumors about how Rose had trapped Silas into marriage, suggested darkly that Silas would regret his choice soon enough. Silas ignored him, which only seemed to fuel Garrett's anger. Rose worried about it more than she wanted to admit, but Silas assured her that Garrett was all bark and no bite. That assessment proved incorrect on a cold November evening when Silas was late returning from a cattle buying trip to Pocatello. Rose waited at the ranch house, trying not to let worry consume her, but as the hours stretched past midnight, her anxiety grew. Tommy tried to reassure her. He probably just stopped at one of the way stations for the night. Weather is turning bad, makes sense to find shelter. But Rose could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl, staring out into the darkness as if she could will Silas to appear through sheer force of wanting. It was nearly 2 in the morning when she heard hoofbeats, rapid and urgent. A rider appeared, but it was not Silas. It was a young man she recognized from one of the neighboring ranches. "Mrs. Reeves," the rider called, dismounting quickly. "There has been trouble. Your husband was ambushed about 10 miles south of here. He is alive, but he is hurt. Doc Mills is with him, but they need you to come." Rose felt the world tilt sickeningly. "How bad?" "He has been shot, madam. I do not know more than that." Tommy was already saddling horses. Rose ran inside to grab medical supplies, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the bundle. Within minutes, they were riding hard through the cold night, following the young man back toward where Silas lay. They found him in a small shepherd's cabin about an hour's ride from the ranch. Doc Mills had set up a makeshift surgery, and Silas lay on a narrow cot, his face pale, his shirt soaked with blood. The doctor looked up when Rose rushed in. "He is stable, but he lost a lot of blood. Bullet went clean through his shoulder, missed anything vital, but it will be a painful recovery." Rose went to Silas's side, taking his hand. His eyes opened, cloudy with pain and laudanum, but he managed a weak smile when he saw her. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "Sorry to worry you." "What happened?" Rose demanded, torn between relief that he was alive and fury that he had been hurt. "Garrett and 2 others," Silas said, each word clearly an effort. "Waited in ambush. Demanded I leave you, said I could do better than a whore for a wife. I told them where they could shove their opinions, and Garrett shot me." "He confessed this?" Doc Mills asked sharply. "All 3 of them were wearing bandanas, but I recognized Garrett's voice, his horse. And right before he shot me, he pulled the bandana down so I would know it was him." The young ranch hand who had fetched Rose spoke up. "I was riding night patrol on our property when I heard the shot. Found Mr. Reeves trying to stop the bleeding. He told me what happened, told me to fetch Doc Mills and Mrs. Reeves. I saw 3 riders heading toward town, and one of them looked like Garrett from what I could tell in the moonlight." "That is attempted murder," Doc Mills said grimly. "We need to get the sheriff involved immediately." But Rose was barely listening. She was focused on Silas, on the pallor of his skin, the pain etched in every line of his face. He had been shot because of her, because he had defended her honor, because he had refused to abandon her when pressured. "This is my fault," she whispered. Silas's hand tightened on hers with surprising strength. "No, this is Garrett's fault. This is the fault of small men who think violence is the answer when they do not get their way. You are not responsible for the actions of bullies and cowards." They got Silas back to the ranch house as dawn was breaking, a careful process that left him gray-faced and sweating despite the cold. Rose refused to leave his side as Doc Mills cleaned and stitched the wound properly, administered more laudanum, and gave detailed instructions for care. "He is strong, and the wound is clean," the doctor said. "With proper rest and no infection, he should make a full recovery, but it will take time." The sheriff came later that morning, a weathered man named Tom Bradley who had been doing the job for nearly 20 years. He took statements from everyone involved, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. "I will bring Garrett in for questioning," Bradley said. "Attempted murder is serious business. But I have to warn you, without witnesses beyond Mr. Reeves's identification, it might be hard to make charges stick. Garrett will claim he was somewhere else, probably has friends who will back his story." "He is going to get away with this?" Rose asked, her voice shaking with rage. "I did not say that. I said it might be hard, but I will do my job, Mrs. Reeves. I promise you that." True to his word, Sheriff Bradley arrested Garrett that afternoon, but as predicted, Garrett claimed he had been playing cards at a saloon in the next town over and had witnesses to prove it. The two men who rode with him could not be positively identified, and without more concrete evidence, the case began to fall apart before it even reached trial. Rose watched the whole process with growing fury and frustration. Silas had been shot, had nearly died, and his attacker was going to walk free because of lies and corrupted witnesses. But Silas, even bedridden and in pain, seemed less concerned than she expected. "Justice is not always about courts and jails," he said one evening as Rose changed his bandages. "Garrett made a mistake. He showed his hand. Let me know exactly who and what he is. That information has value." "What are you planning?" Rose asked suspiciously. "Nothing illegal," Silas assured her with a faint smile. "But Garrett works for Thomas Carver, that rancher on the town council. Carver is a hard man, but he is also practical. He does not like men who bring trouble to his operation. I have sent word to Carver about what happened, along with statements from witnesses who saw Garrett threatening me in town, making violent comments. Carver is not going to keep employing someone who commits attempted murder and brings law enforcement attention to his ranch. So Garrett will lose his job. That is my hope. Without Carver's protection and income, Garrett will have to leave the territory to find work. Problem solved without needing a conviction that was never going to happen anyway." Rose finished tying the fresh bandage and sat back. "You are a devious man, Silas Reeves." "I prefer to think of it as pragmatic," he replied, catching her hand and pulling her down for a gentle kiss. "Now stop worrying about Garrett and come keep me company. Being laid up like this is boring as hell, and you are much prettier to look at than the ceiling." Rose spent the next weeks caring for Silas as he healed, and to her surprise, she discovered a kind of intimacy in the process that went beyond the physical. She bathed him, fed him, read to him, sat with him through the long nights when pain kept him from sleeping. He let her see him weak and vulnerable in ways she suspected few people ever had, and that trust deepened what was already growing between them. And slowly, as autumn turned to winter, Silas's prediction about Garrett came true. Word filtered back that Thomas Carver had indeed fired Garrett and made it clear he was no longer welcome in Malad City. The last anyone heard, he had headed south toward Nevada, looking for work in the mines. Rose felt no triumph at his departure, only relief. One fewer enemy to worry about, one fewer threat hanging over their happiness. By December, Silas was recovered enough to ride again, though Doc Mills cautioned him against heavy work for at least another month. But he could walk around the ranch, check on the livestock, supervise Tommy and the hired hands who helped with winter feeding, and on Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside and a fire crackled in the hearth, Silas gave Rose a gift that made her cry. It was a wooden sign, beautifully carved and painted, reading Rose's books and accounts in elegant script. "I have been thinking," Silas said as Rose stared at the sign in wonder. "You are wasted working part-time at the Lucky Dollar. You have skills that every business in this territory needs. What if you set up your own office here at the ranch? Offer bookkeeping and accounting services to ranchers and businesses. You could work from home, Set your own hours. Build something that is entirely yours. Rose traced the letters with her fingertips, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. He was not just giving her a sign. He was giving her independence, purpose, recognition of her talents. "You think there would be enough business?" she asked. "I know half a dozen ranchers who cannot keep their books straight to save their lives. The general store, the hardware store, even the bank could use better bookkeeping. You would be providing a genuine service, and you would be damn good at it." Rose set the sign down carefully and threw her arms around Silas's neck. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me the chance to be more than what this town decided I was." Silas held her close, his face buried in her hair. "You have always been more, Rose. I just want to make sure the whole world knows it." Spring came, bringing with it new life and new possibilities. Rose set up her office in a room off the main house, and word spread quickly. Within 2 months, she had more clients than she could reasonably handle alone. The income was steady and respectable, and more than that, it gave her a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with Silas's reputation or protection. She was building something through her own merit, and people recognized it. The banker who had once turned his back on her now consulted with her on financial matters. The ranchers who had judged her harshly brought their ledgers to her and paid well for her expertise. Even Mrs. Henderson unbent enough to hire Rose to manage the books for a charitable organization the church ladies ran. It was not exactly friendship, but it was professional respect, and Rose would take it. On a warm May evening, exactly 1 year after she had first walked into the Lucky Dollar Saloon looking for work, Rose stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun set behind the mountains. Silas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "How different my life is now compared to a year ago," Rose said. "How lost I felt, how certain I was that I would never belong anywhere again, and how wrong I was." "You belong here," Silas said firmly. "You belong with me. You belong in this territory building a life that matters. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." Rose turned in his arms to face him. "I have news. I was going to wait until I was certain, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer. I am pregnant, Silas. We are going to have a baby." She watched emotions cascade across his face: shock, joy, wonder, a hint of fear. Then he was lifting her off her feet, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, before setting her down gently as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with awe. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Rose asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Silas said. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I want you to know that you are already loved more than you can possibly imagine. And your mother is the strongest, smartest, most incredible person I have ever known. You are going to be raised by someone who will teach you to stand tall no matter what anyone says." Rose felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure joy. She ran her fingers through Silas's hair as he stayed kneeling before her, talking softly to the child growing inside her, making promises about the life they would build together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Rose continued working, though she scaled back her hours as her belly grew. Tommy was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of a baby on the ranch. Doc Mills checked on her regularly and pronounced her disgustingly healthy. And in October, on a crisp autumn morning with leaves turning gold in the cottonwoods, Rose gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Silas stayed by her side the entire time, despite Doc Mills's suggestion that he might be more comfortable waiting elsewhere. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, murmured encouragement until Rose wanted to strangle him for being so relentlessly positive. But when she finally heard that first outraged cry, when Doc Mills placed the squirming, red-faced infant on her chest, every moment of pain evaporated like morning mist. "He is perfect," Silas whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Rose, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Reeves, Samuel for Silas's middle name, Thomas for Rose's father. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's delicate features, and from the moment he entered the world, he made his opinions known loudly and frequently. Silas was a devoted father from the very first day. He changed diapers, walked the floor with Samuel during colicky nights, sang surprisingly sweet lullabies in his rough voice. Rose would sometimes wake in the night to find Silas sitting in the rocking chair he had built, holding Samuel against his chest, both of them sleeping peacefully. The town's reaction to Samuel's birth was mixed. Some people softened, unable to maintain hostility in the face of an innocent baby. Others saw it as further proof that Rose had trapped Silas, though how she was supposed to have planned a pregnancy that resulted in marriage made no logical sense. But Rose found she cared less and less what the town thought. She had her husband, her son, her work, and a life that brought her genuine satisfaction. The opinions of people who had judged her unfairly mattered less with each passing day. Samuel grew from an infant into a boisterous toddler who showed early signs of his father's stubbornness and his mother's intelligence. He was walking by 10 months, talking in full sentences by 2, and causing creative chaos by 3. When Samuel was 4, Rose gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Matthew and Julia. The ranch house that had once seemed spacious suddenly felt full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos of small children. Silas hired additional help to handle ranch work, so he could spend more time with his growing family. Rose cut back her bookkeeping business to focus on the children, though she never gave it up entirely. That independent income, that recognition of her skills, remained important to her sense of self. Tommy married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and built his own house on Silas's property, becoming not just an employee but family in all the ways that mattered. Pete eventually sold the Lucky Dollar and retired to California, but not before telling Rose that hiring her was the smartest business decision he ever made. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of horses and the land. Matthew was quieter, more studious, showing an aptitude for numbers that made Rose think he might take over her bookkeeping business someday. Julia was fierce and independent, afraid of nothing, constantly testing boundaries and driving her parents to distraction. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Silas took Rose back to the small cabin where she had first lived when she came to the ranch. It sat empty now, used occasionally for storage, but Silas had cleaned it out and filled it with candles and wildflowers. "I wanted to remind you of where we started," he said, taking her hands in his. 10 years ago, you came here scared and alone, and I offered you shelter. I had no idea that you would end up sheltering me too. You gave me a family, Rose. You gave me purpose beyond just working the land. You made me better than I was." Rose reached up to touch his face, still handsome though now there was silver threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that came from years of sun and laughter. "You saved me, Silas, not just from poverty or judgment, but from believing that I was what they said I was. You saw who I really was and loved that person. You gave me back my own worth." They made love in that small cabin, slow and tender and familiar, bodies that knew each other intimately after 10 years of marriage. And afterward, lying tangled together in the dim candlelight, Silas said something that made Rose's heart swell. They called you a fallen woman. But when I looked at you, I saw someone who stood taller than anyone else in that whole damn town. I saw strength and courage and grace under pressure that most people could never match. And I see that still, every single day. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Rose Reeves, and I am grateful every day that you chose to build this life with me. Rose kissed him deeply, pouring a decade of love and gratitude into that kiss. I would choose you again in every lifetime under any circumstances. You are my home, Silas. You always have been. As they grew older together, watching their children become adults, watching the territory change and grow, Rose often thought about the path that had brought her to Idaho. The mail-order bride scheme that had seemed like such a disaster had actually been the doorway to the life she was meant to live. She had come to Malad City expecting one kind of love story and found something far better. She had learned that real love was not about romance and grand gestures, though Silas had given her plenty of both over the years. Real love was about showing up every day, standing together through the hard times, believing in each other when the world said to walk away. Samuel took over managing the ranch when Silas's joints started to complain about long days in the saddle. Matthew did indeed take over Rose's bookkeeping business, expanding it into a full accounting firm that served clients across 3 territories. Julia married a lawyer and moved to Boise, where she scandalized society by occasionally arguing cases herself, despite having no formal legal training. And through it all, Silas and Rose remained the steady center, the foundation on which their family was built. On a warm summer evening when Rose was 62 and Silas 65, they sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun set behind the mountains they both loved. 3 grandchildren played in the yard while their parents visited inside. The air smelled of sage and pine and the promise of rain. "Any regrets?" Silas asked, his hand finding hers automatically after decades of the gesture. Rose pretended to consider seriously. "Well, there was that time you bought that horrible stallion who kept escaping and terrorizing the neighbors' mares. That was regrettable." Silas laughed, the sound still rich and warm despite the years. "That horse had character." "That horse had an excessive character," Rose corrected. "But no, my love, no real regrets, except perhaps that I wasted time at the beginning being afraid of what we could be together. I should have trusted my heart sooner." "You trusted it exactly when you were ready," Silas said, "and we have had a good life, Rose, a really good life." Rose leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the familiar strength there even if age had changed the details. "The best life. You know what the finest irony is? All those people who called me a fallen woman, who tried to drive me out of town, they thought they were protecting the community from corruption. But I helped build this community. My accounting work supported local businesses. Our children contributed in meaningful ways. We employed people, paid taxes, participated in civic life. Everything they feared I would destroy, I helped create instead. Because they were wrong about who you were," Silas said simply. "They judged the surface and missed everything important underneath. Their loss, my tremendous gain." One of their grandchildren, a little girl of 5 named Sarah, came running up to the porch. "Grandma Rose, Grandpa Silas, can you tell us the story again, about how you met?" Rose smiled and pulled Sarah onto her lap. "Again? We just told it last week." "But I like it," Sarah insisted. "It is romantic." Silas winked at Rose over Sarah's head. "Well, if the lady insists, It was a hot day in August, and your grandmother had just arrived in town. She was brave and smart and beautiful, and everyone else was too foolish to see it except me." "That is not quite how I remember it," Rose interjected with a smile. "As I recall, I was desperate and alone, and you were too stubborn to let injustice stand." "We can both be right," Silas said diplomatically. "The point is, I met a woman who took my breath away. I saw past what everyone else saw and recognized something special, and I have spent every day since then grateful that she gave me a chance." Sarah sighed happily. "That is so romantic." After the children were called in for bed, Silas and Rose sat together in the gathering darkness. The stars were coming out, brilliant against the black velvet of the sky, and Rose counted constellations she had learned to name in the years since leaving Boston behind. "I love you," she said softly, the words as true now as they had been when she first spoke them decades ago. "I love you too," Silas replied. "Forever, Rose, in this life and whatever comes after." They sat together until the night grew cold and the moon rose over the mountains, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a love that would outlast them both. And if anyone had asked Rose whether she regretted the path that brought her to that moment, she would have said no without hesitation. Because sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the very best parts. Sometimes being broken open lets the light in. And sometimes the people who see us at our lowest become the ones who help us rise higher than we ever imagined possible. Rose Thompson had come to Idaho as a mail-order bride and found betrayal and scandal. But she had also found something far more precious. A man who saw her worth when no one else would, a love that defied judgment and gossip, and a life built on mutual respect and partnership that sustained them both through decades of joy and challenge. They called her a fallen woman. But Silas Reeves saw a woman who stood taller than anyone else in town, and he spent the rest of his life making sure she knew it, and that made all the difference.